what went wrong for England on Saturday?
The coach is here, you'd have to ask him. But in my opinion, I don't know why they seemed, from where I was sat in the ground, and you've got to remember I'm typing a lot, but it seemed like they kicked behind Samoa a lot. I don't know kind of why. I think maybe the other thing was Samoa weren't the team that they were
4 weeks ago, anyway.
And I don't know how much that played into their heads, and the fact that Samoa had just come off a really tight game with Tonga, and England had just come off basically, they got a bit of resistance in the second half from PNG. I don't know how much that undercut them. And the other thing for me was probably a lack of variation from the bench. When Samoa lost New Brown to concussion, they had Harris Tavita, who's playing every week it becomes his last game before he goes on a hiatus. England really didn't have any variation, I didn't feel, and the only thing we kind of went to was moving Bateman to centre and McMeekin to back row, and Radley played at hooker for a short period. And when he's just done 40 minutes tackling blokes in the middle, that probably catches up with you. And then the other thing I think is almost the fact that a lot of those guys that played State of Origin in that Samoa team, they are used to playing right until the final minute, and just little lapses maybe from England is what cost them. So,
am I being unfair in asking what went wrong for England? Should I be giving all the praise to Samoa?
Well, some of it, yeah. If you're going to put 10p in me, I'll be going in for 10 minutes. So
that's fine.
I think we'd have all picked different teams if we all, but that's the nature of the beast. So I wouldn't say who or what, but I'd have done something a little bit different personally. You all would, I know that. So, and then I just thought Samoa learned tactically. They've learned a lot from that first game. We know that they were half drunk first game. We all understand that. There's no dramas there. However, England were fantastic. And I thought going into that, England was probably the form team of the entire competition, not seeing any frailties. But one thing they hadn't had to do is kick out of yardage, because they made so many metres. So we've not seen anything out of yardage. I don't believe they've got too much range there with Wellesby and Williams at pivots. Not having a running hooker in there enabled them to Samoa to put pressure on from Marcus. So they were, if I were coaching against England, I'd be saying front load all your energy down in yardage, because coming out of yardage is something they've not had to do. And then I also think in the first game, I thought Chris Hill and Callum Watkins did a great job at getting Danny Levi, and a lot of England's good work came on the back of their quick rucks. I thought they were going to do the same thing. They were going for Noah Brown until they knocked him out. So they did too good of a job because they knocked him out. He got off the field, and is it Tavita Harris? Tavita, which way around?
Harris to Tavita Harris.
I think he was the unsung hero of the game, because he's a tall lad. I think he did 46 tackles, and he just shut everything down in terms of ruck momentum for England. I thought England still tried to shift on slow ruck, and that was the difference from the first game to that game. And Samoa again learned. They got Bayer in defence. Tim Laffey, my boy on the left edge, shut that down. And England's best work came in around Milford. I thought when they went down to 12 men, England still employed that early kick, which has been successful for not only in the Samoan game. They scored off a Wellesby kick early. They, I think, did against France as well. Obviously, pointed out that Suwali is probably not Suwali, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but his positioning sometimes can be a little bit off, as brilliant as he is, so they've gone for that option. But I just think they should have gassed him a little bit more, because we've seen under pressure, under sustained pressure, set for set, Samoa, the big fellas there, can struggle getting around the corner, and because England got them time and time again on them short sides. Last time saw them keep go, so don't get too technical here, but I just thought they learned a little bit more. I thought they were more adaptable, so they learned on the move, and I thought England weren't adaptable, so I don't think they learned lessons on the move enough. And it's a tough one. I thought Samoa were brilliant. I thought England weren't at the best, and I said that through gritted teeth, because I thought they tried the best, and nobody can ever doubt the commitment, courage. They got off the canvas a few times there, England, so that was the drama. They created the drama by getting up off the canvas, but you know they didn't put they weren't the best version of themselves, and that's when it hurts a little bit more, I think.
I think that's the difference with the women as well, that we know that watching that game last night, I'm not sure the women could have given any more. It was just that they were beaten by a physically more dominant team who play in a level of competition predominantly that is higher than the standard of the Englishmen playing. And they came off the pitch equally as distraught as the men, but could hold their heads up and say, I'm not sure we can do any more. I reckon that, you know, without going into incidents that may not have happened in a hotel afterwards, England's men will have been incredibly frustrated because they could have done more. The most astonishing period for me was goal one extra time. Yeah. Because as you say, England had done so well to get it back to 26. 26 all, you thought the momentum will be with them if they can come up with a couple of really good sets at the start of goal one. And it was arguably the worst I've ever seen the team play.
Yeah. It was messy, weren't it, that period.
And I think something that George said as well, which applies as much to the Australia-New Zealand game the night before, is if you play Origin, you have got a mentality that most people can't match. So New Zealand were great on Friday night, but when it really came down to the last 20 minutes, you could see which team played Origin regularly and which players didn't, because Australia had that ability to shut the game down for the last 20 minutes. We're ahead, we know exactly what we need to do. We don't need to do anything other than we do every week in our domestic competition at a higher level in Origin. So everything you throw at us, I think we can handle. And you got the impression that enough of the Samoans could do that, and the New Zealand women could do that as well.
Australia's game plan was to outwork New Zealand. That's what the game plan was. And then they did a 15-minute period where they relentlessly kicked. And that period where Samoa were down to 12, England should have replicated that period. Full set, kick, tackle, and just gassed New Zealand. That 15-minute period, whatever it was awesome from Australia. And the clip with Smith when he was basically looked like he'd had 15 pints, didn't he? Yeah. The first tackle he'll get you, the second time he'll get you, the third time he's gone. And Australia just scored what seemed a simple try, but in effect, it wasn't simple. What it was is, it was just a great example of the discipline and repetition that Australia, through playing in State of Origin and the competition that they played, and the mentality that's been enforced since 2016, Four Nations from Mal's tenure. They've built everything on hard work and character, and so they've outworked New Zealand there. They've got them in the end, and that's the philosophy. And they did get them in the end. I don't use the word lucky because they're not lucky. They thought they mastered their own destiny there through that hard work, but they're so disciplined, and ultimately what they do is they do things to a consistently high standard for longer periods of time than any other team over many, many years. So I thought New Zealand were unlucky though, because they played some good rugby, and we can go back to that try that it was a harsh one.
And they needed Mulitalo out there for that last 10 minutes as well, because he was offering something different. And by the end of the game, because of that relentlessness of Australia, they didn't have the attacking options that perhaps they would have done with him as an outlet. So they were unfortunate.
The other one at training last week at Kangaroos training, they were getting other players to run in the position of Asafa Solomona and Smith. And it's ironic what you were saying is that those were the two players that Cameron Murray ran at, and I think it was the first tackle on that set, and it was so basic, but it's because they'd done so much they planned it all week to take the sting out of those two guys, because they knew that New Zealand's such a powerful team down the middle.
I think Samoa took a little bit of a leaf out of that book with Mickey Mack. Yeah. He's going to belt you first time, so go again, and then go again, and they get you in the end, don't they? And I think they did a decent job there in and around that middle. So go back to what you said, maybe an option to replace with a fresh.
Could I say something about the kicking game?
Oh, who's kicking game? England's.
Everybody's kicking game. Yeah. They get to the fifth tackle and they kick it right down to the end and get it far away. The number of times I've seen people line up, the men are going forward, with no one just behind. So if they just get a little kick over to one side or the other, they've got their men coming through, they'll have two or three. If someone catches it, they've got one on one side, one on the other, they can score a try.
Yeah, that's the problem is, it's about the discipline of Australia, isn't it? And and so that would be perceived as a risk, wouldn't it? Because if they do turn and
Well,
catch it,
you're
they give
there
away
to win a
field
game,
position.
you've got to take risks to win a game.
You're talking to a guy whose team played more, take more risk than anybody else. So.
And the other thing about this kicking is that whenever the fifth tackle comes up, the wingers go back.
Yeah.
And you see 5 against 3 on one side and 5 against 3 on the other. I've seen no one so far pass the ball out to the wings.
Unless you've got Josh Adokar, in which case you can chip.
1 minute's there.
Well,
How good was that try?
Actually, the first Australia try was the Adam Carr one, and that obviously wasn't a pass, but they realised that the Kiwi wingers had dropped so deep, so they said, well, we'll kick it. Oh, he was out of position rather.
That was a tremendous try, but it came out of the blue. They hadn't done much else.
Yeah, well, because they was on the right edge,
Yeah.
the Kiwi right winger had tucked, fullbacks on sideline, so they come across. So there was a lot of space out there, but still, the accuracy of that kick, the speed of Adam Carr. Well, I'm not sure which one's best, but I mean that was some try.
Yeah.
Wasn't it, you know?
And it came out of the blue, and that gave them a...
Yeah, but the kick should have been to the right corner in that 10 metre by 10 metre square.
Well,
and then
that's
they
what's
belted
been
them.
happening, and nothing's been happening.
Yeah.
He does a kick to the side.
Well, it has been happening. It's not been scoring, but it's definitely 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Australia got you in the end,
Yeah.
so they won.
Well, you've already talked about one thing.
Intense games, we need more of them. We keep mentioning Origin. I'm not going to even mention what people keep saying, but how would you bring in more intense games into the men's game in this country?
Well, I just think, and I'll say this because we had 13 people represented, I think there should be reward for clubs for players playing representation. So the text that it makes more buying from clubs, because ultimately in this country I think the club sometimes is valued more than the country or the representation, whether that be Lancashire, All-Stars, Colin, whatever it is. If there's a financial reward for them clubs, it might just be a little bit more forthcoming on saying, oh no, you're playing, don't have yeah, you might have a bruise, but you're good. And so I think if it was worthwhile, because ultimately clubs, like you just spoke about all the economic difficulties. Well, clubs are having economic difficulties. Everybody's struggling. So why would a club want to forfeit and risk their prize assets for a mid-season competition, if you like a state of origin? However, if there's financial reward, you get the best players, and I know you're referring to Lancashire, Yorkshire, and I think that's good. I like Lancashire, Yorkshire. Well, then you get your best players, and it becomes a worthwhile project, doesn't it? And you can get to see and get to try and emulate what Australia have done over many years, but and you can grow it. We just never give it a chance, and we've never really backed it, have we? Really, let's be honest. It's always been a half-hearted attempt, but that's the truth of the matter. And why is it an half-hearted attempt? Because club is valued more than representative for country or county. That's my thoughts.
I'd always thought Yorkshire, Lancashire was a bit of a kind of a dated concept, in that the game wanted to be more kind of, appealing to all people from everywhere in the country. But I'm with Paul in that, having lived in Australia for the last 4 years, you see the intensity of the rivalry and what it does to people, where a game is decided on one decision. How many Super League games are decided on one decision? Or, well, I suppose it's more elite level, but it breeds that kind of intensity. So bring it back, but then go to Channel 4 and say, well, here's a new TV commodity, and sell it differently to the existing Sky deal. And then, you obviously need help when people are allowed to throw punches, because that's it's built the folklore.
Is this back in hotels, or are we on the pitch?
No, on the field. But the refs in Origin kind of let anything go, and it's kind of been able to build the mystique.
The World Cup, and has been not anything go, because I think there is a genuine responsibility for where we are with HIAs. But there's been a leniency in
You're
the
saying
World
there's been
Cup,
common sense.
and we've just enjoyed it, because there's been physical.
Took away the
confrontation.
frustration of the fans, I think, is what you're saying. But
Well,
you mentioned about a valid international calendar. Well, that Lancashire, Yorkshire should lead into that. They pick Australia via Origin, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, if you aren't playing, if them things come in, if you aren't putting yourself forward for Lancashire and Yorkshire, then you can forget England as well. Like, you've got to put reward there as well as jeopardy, and there's too much jeopardy in them mid-season games at the minute for the clubs. There's not enough reward.
It goes right back to what George said and we said earlier. IMG have to go out and sell Rugby League.
Yeah.
And they've got to sell a set of assets. But the assets have got to be agreed by us what's good for the game. So if that's Lancashire, Yorkshire, that's Lancashire, Yorkshire. Let's go get on with the broadcaster. You know, Viaplay have now taken over Premier Sports, so suddenly you'd have a conversation with them because Premier Sports were really pleased with the Championship deal. Channel 4 have renewed for 2023. So there's a bit more competition around for Sky now. Sky might have to pay a little bit more. Or there's, you know, the Amazon Primes of this world and Facebook Lives and all of that stuff. We've just got to make sure that our assets are of real good value. And we've got to have some new assets to get new broadcasters to say, yeah, I'll invest in that and see how it goes. That's what we need. And that's how you pay the clubs, Paul.
I think just going back to the return of physical rugby league, that Tonga Samoa game had as much physicality as anything we've seen in recent years, but it didn't extend to head-high tackles. So I think the balance was right in that game, that you can have physicality still in modern rugby. Somebody who says it isn't what it was. No, it isn't, but would you want to watch anything more than that? I think the other thing about Lancashire and Yorkshire is I'm not sure that fits with you saying we need to expand the profile of the game. I think if you made it East and West, and the French players could play for the East, and you know, West was London as well as, you know, players born in the South, I think it's a new commodity. I think we can't sell it along the lines of Lancashire and Yorkshire because that failed for a reason.
I'm not sure I'd have the French, you know, because you want it to be a feeder for your England.
Well, you might if there were English players playing in France.
But you said French players.
Well, players who play in France.
No, who's changed it now?
Well,
so yeah,
I think
we
it's Rugby League will change it because we want to improve the French game as well, don't we?
Yeah, but
so
we want to feed England. That's that's the reward.
But East and West or something, a new concept other than Yorkshire and Lancashire, I think that's sellable. But you have to lessen the domestic season.
But is it sellable because I want to watch Yorkshire beat Lancashire?
Yeah, but that's because you're from Yorkshire and you.
Or vice versa. But I would turn off these
Why did Yorkshire Lancashire fail? Because Yorkshire took it seriously and nobody really thought Lancashire was a viable option. Because there's something about, with all due respect to the fact that we're in Stockport, Yorkshire is an identity and Lancashire isn't as much. It's Greater Manchester, it's Merseyside, it's sort of lost that red rose tag.
You're now
I'm not sure about that.
You're our bodyguard on the front right.
He's the first coach.
People stop watching because Yorkshire won every time, because people like Peter Fox could go into a dressing room and talk about what Yorkshireness was, and Lancashire could never match that. And in the end, when it finished, not only were Yorkshire winning every game, but nobody was turning up to watch them.
No chance. I'm not having that. No chance. We have Yorkshire players drive over the boundary every day, and there's banter straight from the minute, straight from as soon as they get in. So we recognise we're Lancashire.
You know what it's like.
Exactly. So I'm in there. I'm an imposter. I've seen what it's like on the other side. I know how they, I feel sorry for it.
You need to find Lancashireness.
But it's also great in terms of building up the kind of the head-to-head, right? Because if let's say, for example, Samoa do come over here in 23, I'm not saying they are, but come in at the end, you know, Callum Watkins playing at centre, he will be Lancashire, right? And then there's someone like, I don't know, a Joe Connor who misses out. He's then saying, you know, I want to prove to Wayne that he has to pick me on this Samoa, and it's great because then they're going at it.
And it's the mate against mate thing as well, which we miss.
But it goes back to how do you market a product, right? We might sit there and say Lancashire didn't take it seriously, but the one thing I think the World Cup's grabbed the imagination is we've gone out there and shown people what wheelchair looks like, what women's looks like. We've got clips where we're using social media well, so people are actually texting each other. That opening game against Australia from the Copper Box, people were texting each other, going, I'm watching Rugby League, wheelchair Rugby League, and guess what, you need to watch it. And you see the peak audience just rise like that. So you have to market a Lancashire game. And that's how you then would sit there and say, yeah, we take it seriously. Because you create this thing that says we are tribal, it is Lancashire, it's Yorkshire. We go back to the War of the Roses in 1453 or whatever it was, right? And you could do the Yorkshire take it serious, Lancashire don't. People like Paul get upset, and then we go, right, I'm making sure you play. Before you know it, you've got this state of origin mentality where actually it matters more than playing for your country. right? And everybody wants to watch it. That's how they get eyeballs on it. So, you know, but marketing has a point, and that's IMG's job. Keep going back to it. Why did we sign a 12-year contract? Because they've got the opportunity to take our sport to a new level. Fingers crossed, based on, you know, the biggest, best, most inclusive World Cup we've ever seen. That's the big challenge for IMG.
I'm still trying to get my head around this notion of Yorkshireness and what it is.
You have to be born there.
I was.
There's no such thing.
I'm as English as Don Young, I'm from Wakefield.
There's a ridiculous phrase, adopted Yorkshire. There is no such thing. You are either
No, we sent Michael Vaughan back.
God's County or you're not.
Also, as someone whose grandfather was from St Helens but born in Huddersfield, who do I qualify for? Well, that's the great thing. You can
Well, the
get
best
into
way that the grandfather worked for the other.
Eligibility rules.
Yes.
Yeah, we can have some fun with that as well. Then.
Brown said you walk like a duck, you talk like a duck, you're a duck. So you're from Huddersfield.
but I'm Manchester born and bred, so I'm a Lancashire. But we haven't got that. I think, Phil, you've got something. You know, you are right. We sort of do it, but they do it better. Yorkshire, whenever there's an Olympics on, there's always a league table of where Yorkshire would finish if they were a nation. Right? And I think they worked out it was 8th in the last Olympics. That's the bit I think you mean, which is that level of Yorkshireness, that identity, right? Which is that mentality, and they do it. I walk across, and I've got mates in Yorkshire, but boy, do they let me know where I live, where I come from. And you almost want to do the, I won't mind taking you on and giving you good stuff.
Think the other option is England against England nights. So you've got the incumbent England players and you've got those that would like to knock them off, and you've still got then your mate against mate, you've still got...
Yes, enough, because it's not a realistic pathway to England. You
pathway to the next
you need
thing.
Callum playing against Connor.
Yeah.
But they could do
The
that.
best one's going to get picked.
Could do that with England and England nights.
But England nights seems a second team.
No. That's something we need to change.
Well, then that's a different product, though.
But we need new products. We need
No,
products.
but you need an England nights because that's the pathway.
Yeah.
So this is different.
But you want people in that pathway to knock off the ones that are already
Yeah,
at the top
but
of
the
that.
pathway is not level with the England team. So you want something that's level, fighting for that.
I mean,
The Knights can split into Lancashire and Yorkshire to fight for that.
We spent 8 years on this programme not wanting to bring back Yorkshire and Lancashire. Now you're talking us into it.
I'm not even bothered. I do. I just like create a conversation.
But
Where would the London players play?
Well,
No players born in London. So Mike McMeekin, who's from Basingstoke, would he play for Yorkshire?
I'm not sure. I've not thought that deep into it. But
No,
yeah.
no, but I think, yeah,
But
we
isn't
need to
that-
have a concept.
Yeah.
where
Isn't that the
it's
debate?
It's inclusive.
That's the debate. So
Yeah.
do those two suggestions, Lancashire, Yorkshire, England nights, do they have to be mutually exclusive?
No.
What if you've had 6 representative games of different variations that actually just brought a level of intensity more than yet another loop fixture of a Super League game? And that's how you might spread it out. If you pay the clubs, then suddenly you get the TV. We just got to think
And I
really
think
different
that's the
about our
problem with
sport.
Magic Weekend, that it doesn't give you intensity. It's just another fixture that skews the league table, and that's what we need to get right.
So what I'm going to sell to IMG now, because obviously I've come up with this idea in my head right now, is on Channel 4, for this Yorkshire-Lancashire thing, we have the selectors of the teams debating who's in the squad on telly.
X Factor.
Yeah.
Golden
Put the pictures around there.
Aussie for years have been making themselves stronger by having these Origin series, because they play each other 3 times every year. New Zealand is the closest country to them, and they hardly ever play test matches against them. They ignore New Zealand, they play themselves, and they make themselves stronger.
And Australians play
Actually,
with
Michael Maguire said that on Friday. He said the Australian players won that game because they were used to playing at a greater level of intensity.
Well, it's a greater level because they won't let other countries in to play them.
But what's
The test
interesting
matches
is
are serious.
Samoa making the final, because the Pacific now becomes an area where we really need to look after. You know, Tonga broke the mould, and Samoa have stepped into it. If we're seriously talking about taking the next World Cup after France to the Pacific Islands, which would predominantly around New Zealand, but you could see a game played in PNG, maybe one in Apia, depending on how Samoa do, can you imagine what that would be like if they're, taking the game there? I think if we're serious about that, we have to have a test schedule in place whereby more nations are playing each other before that World Cup, and I think there is a willingness now to try and do that.
I'm willing to cover any games in Fiji if think.
Cook Islands.
I want to go to Cook Islands. Everyone's told me it's beautiful, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And one of them's called Danger Island, but they renamed it. I mean, why would you rename something called Danger Island?
And they've got an international airport.
Yeah.
Where do they fly?
Auckland.
Well, that's a bit me.